welcome back to episode 2 of 3 Candid Questions, season 2. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 about communication skills. Let me know what you thought of all the interesting points that Shelley had to share. And now it's time for another deep dive. Fatí Light is an amazing life coach, and I really enjoyed this very colorful, very emotional, very authentic conversation with her about life, about moving on, about creating the space and the community that is good for you. So enjoy, subscribe, like, comment, and show us lots of love. And we are here to show you lots of love too. Speak soon.
So I'm really curious to see where the conversation takes us today, because, we have already chatted a lot. So now I'm like, yeah, let's get into it.
I know we always say, right, we should just really record us, waiting room, conversations.
Exactly.
Conversations too, because I don't know, somehow they're like the funniest, the most, natural in a sense,
Exactly. So that's why we said we'll hit the record button now and try to just take the conversation further.
Right.
So before we jump into the topic we had just started, and we'll tell our lovely audience very soon what this is all about, just introduce yourself a little.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
So I am a life coach. I like to call myself a life design coach, because to me that is very much what we do as coaches, right?
Mm-hmm.
We design our lives in the way that we intentionally want it to go, right? And we help
Yes.
that, right? So to me that really describes it so well. But I'm also very attached to the word design, because I was a fashion designer before that.
Mm-hmm.
That I am a fashion designer, right? I realized recently I didn't have to let go of that.
Absolutely.
Let go of it, right? It's a part of me. But I'm also a mom. I'm a single mom of 2 kids, 10 and 7. And I'm a very independent, outspoken woman that has lived in 3 different continents in her life. So, just to give you a little bit of a background, I am half Persian, half Italian. I was born in Iran during a very tumultuous time where the government got taken over by who's there now. And if you're familiar with the politics of what's going on there now, it's basically picking back up from what happened back then. So
Yes.
almost 40 years ago. No, longer, because I'm older than that. We're not older yet. So, like at the end of the 70s. So just put it together. And then, then eventually, it got really political, it got really violent.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, because I'm half Italian, we had Italian citizenship, we were able to leave the country.
Mm.
But we were not some of those people that just had to escape. We're actually able to leave. It wasn't that easy. But, long story short, we were able to move. We moved to Italy, where my mom was, born and raised. And I was raised there after that. But before that, in the year after us moving there, my dad moved to Italy with us, and then he went back. He was politically involved with what was happening, and he ended up being captured and executed by the government. So as a kid, I lived through some really traumatic, serious, heavy stuff. And it was actually quite the contrast coming from Iran to Italy. It was like going from a place that was literally a war, because by then the war between Iran and Iraq had started too. So there was literally a war happening. And then now being in Italy,
Yeah.
land of love and wine and Vespas, and it was an adjustment for me. It was quite the adjustment, but an adjustment that I made eventually. Took a little while, because my dad had just died, and took me. I'm not quite sure that I really fully ever processed all of that, right? A lot of the work that I've done on myself later in my life, more recently, really helped me understand that a lot of it had gone unprocessed. because I was so young, because I didn't have the support I needed, because there was a lot of trauma around it, right? So as a coach today, I am very trauma informed. I'm very sensitive to that. And I truly, truly, really understand it because I lived it. You know, I carried that with me for most of my life, right? So anyway, fast forward, Italy, I grew up there. I had quite a difficult upbringing with my family, my relationship with my mom, suffered from a lot of depression in my teens. And I understand now that it was related to all of the stuff that as a kid, I just wasn't able to process. And I'm right, just because of the nature of how things went down. And it was so, you know, sometimes I feel like adults try to protect us, right? And as mothers, I know you're a mother too, we just do the best that we can with the knowledge that we have, right?
Of course.
What we're able to do. And I think that my mom did the best that she could. She wanted to protect us, but the protection became confusion for me, right? And not understanding what had happened, where my dad had gone, and where was he, right? So there were a lot of factors that I feel really contributed to the severe depression that I had as a teenager. I even tried to commit suicide a few times. I had an eating disorder. I was hospitalized a few times. So very, very intense years, right? And then when I think back, though, there were also like a lot of amazing memories and fun moments. And I feel that where I found, you know, my happy place was with my friendships and really with the life outside of my household, right? And that makes so much sense today, right? As a coach, I speak so much about the power of community and support system and really surrounding yourself with who makes you feel good, right? And that we're not stuck with our environment, right? But no one ever tells us that, right?
Yeah.
Think that we're stuck with who's around us and we fall into these relationships, right? We can't choose that with our families for a long time, right? But we carry that over, right? And that was very empowering for me to realize that at some point I can choose who I spend my time with. I can choose who I surround myself with. And just because someone's family, it doesn't mean that I have to be stuck with them, right?
Let me ask you a question here, because I think that's a very, very interesting point that you're talking about, this sense that many people have that, okay, because they're blood related or defined as my family, I'm sort of stuck with them. And I have to, even if it's toxic, even if it's feeling suffocating or constricting or whatever it is, I have to sort of stick it out. So and there's often guilt when we don't feel like we can accept it or we can make it work. So how did you come to that point where you said, yeah, it's actually okay that I choose my people or, you know, my community?
Do you want a quick answer?
I don't know. I mean, I'm all for the deep dive, but
we can go deeper into that. But the short answer is
yes,
hit enough walls. Right? I hit my face against enough walls.
Yeah.
That, there was one wall that I hit and that's like, fast forward to more recent years. And that's, what we're talking about. When we came on, when I decided to separate from my husband, with whom I have 2 children. And for some reason, and now I know what the reason is, this one wall, which really wasn't the hardest wall I hit in my life, because, everybody's threshold is going to be a little different, right? Mine, like I'll go back to what happened after, right? My Italy years to now being in New York City. But like what I realized when this happened was that what I had always done to cope, right, in my life, to dig myself out of these really terrible moments was not going to work with 2 children, right? Being responsible for these 2 lives, right? These 2 human beings that I loved so much, right? I just couldn't fall apart the way I always did, right? We're talking about depression, and I tried to commit suicide and eating disorders, right? That was a cry for help, and I wanted to be seen. I wanted to, for those around me to acknowledge the deep pain that I felt, because one of the things that happened in my environment was that was always denied. My reality was always denied. I was always told that, no, yeah, you're just being difficult, or there's something wrong with your nervous system, or you're just like, you're using this as an excuse, right? And that was pretty much the answer I got every time I screamed for help, right? So two things happened. I stopped screaming for help, and I started coping in ways that were self-destructive, right? Self-destructive. So anyway, what ended up happening was that I had this psychoanalyst that I was seeing at the time, and if you've ever done analysis, it's literally like the movies. You lay down, they don't say a word, and you don't even see them, right? And at some point, after a while that I was, in treatment with him, he spoke. He spoke, and the topic was about whether or not I was going to take an opportunity to move to the U.S. for a year to be with my dad's family and learn English, because I was also, like when you're not feeling well, everything's a reflection of that, right? I was very confused. I had no direction. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I was studying political science, didn't fit me, but I didn't have the tools or the guidance to turn that around, to even do that kind of introspection, because I think I was so in the trauma, I was deep in it, right, without really realizing it. So anyway, he spoke. This one day he spoke, and he said to me, I truly believe that you should take this opportunity and go. Let me tell you, there's something to be said about that, right? When someone never says anything, as coaches, do a lot of listening, but when we do speak, is intentionally, right?
Yes.
That was very intentional on his part, and he resonated. And I took his advice and I left, because part of the problem, going back to environment, was that I would be treated and I would get better. I would see therapists and I would get better. But then when I would go back home, I would regress again, right? Because I would be back in my environment, an environment that wasn't healthy for me. Right? So I think he felt that just getting me out of there was going to help me, right?
Yeah.
And you know what? Lo and behold, it's been 22 years. Like, I left, I never went back, right? And with this, I don't want to like cast a shadow of like my family is a terrible family. My mom's a terrible mom, like, because I grew up with just my mom. It's not that, but I think we can all look at our families and see the dysfunction, see that there's some toxic patterns, right? It never is, and this is something that I teach my kids a lot. It never is about the person being good or bad. Everyone is good inside, right? Everyone deep inside is good. It's the behavior. The behavior is a reflection of deeper discomfort within them, right? And that alone, right? To me, that alone, understanding that can be transformative, right? Relationships, because one of the things that I run across a lot with people is this seeing everybody's behavior as a reflection of themselves, right? Wrong about them, or they're not rejected, right? But the moment that you flip that around, you make that mindset shift that, no, but wait a minute, that behavior doesn't feel good, right? And it really has nothing to do with me. It always person. And even when I show up, that I'm not showing up at my best. Let's say with my kids, it's not about my kids. It's about how I'm showing up that day. It's about everything else that's going on in the background, right? So yeah, that was a pretty big shift for me, right? To realize that. And I just wanted to say that because I do love my family. And at the same time, sometimes it's easier to love those that are, you know, like close to you from afar.
Mm.
It actually may save the relationship, may actually preserve what can be preserved, right? And because it's not, you know, oftentimes, you know, people take the advice of, you know, like surround yourself with people that feed you, that support you, and all of this, and then they go to the extreme of letting go of everybody else in their lives, right? I don't believe in that either. And I really came to realize that a lot of the disappointment that I felt was about my own expectations, right? When we expect people to give us or be or do something because that's our own expectation, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what they want to do, that's what they're willing to do, or that's something that they can do, right?
Exactly. Are they even able to fulfill our expectations? That's a very good question to ask.
Right.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the answer is they're not, because if they would, right? So, but that doesn't mean that person, you have to throw everyone away because they don't meet all your check boxes, right? But what does this person give me? And can I just keep my relationship focused on that, right? Obviously, if someone doesn't give you anything, then I would say walk away from that relationship, right? But truthfully, it's important to do that. It's important to value relationships that you've had even for a long time, with the understanding that as we evolve and grow and change, we may no longer be a match the way we were. We may have to relearn how we are in a relationship, or we may just like be focused on what works, right? And let go of wanting everything from everyone, right?
Yeah,
Everyone
absolutely.
need everything, that all our expectations.
I'm just wondering, like, because the story that you were telling about your own experience, it's really deep trauma and so much pain for so many years, caught in that cycle of repetition. How, I mean, I understand that moving to the US and taking that opportunity, like, sort of pulled you out of that simply because you put some space.
I put some space, right?
Yeah. But what were some other things that you now looking back say that really helped me? It was the one advice of that one person, but...
So what the one thing and the one person in my whole life, you know, and I'm going to remove my kids from that because it's a little different. But, you know, the reason why I ended up staying was because I met someone and I fell in love with the person. Now, this person came into my life and he was the opposite of everything that I had in my life, right? I truly believe that this person, who ended up being my first husband, was in my life for a purpose. Like he came into my life to show me something I had never experienced, which was unconditional love. I mean, he saw in me something that no one had ever seen before. He saw me, he acknowledged me, he believed in me, he encouraged me. He was very nourishing, right? And I had never received that kind of healthy, unconditional love in my life, right? I received love. It wasn't always necessarily healthy, right? It was, the behavior maybe wasn't always consistent with demonstrating love, right? So I truly believe that if it wasn't for him, I would never know what it's like to be on the other side of that, right? Now, as you know, right, patterns tend to repeat in our lives until we're fully able to see things, right, and shift them. And while I had this incredible relationship that was very fulfilling, that really changed me forever, another tragedy happened where he got sick and he died, right? So again, you know, and it was very, you know, like years later, as I was once my divorce started, I was like trying to process this. Like I did this thing that now I do with my clients too, where we just create like our storyboard. And when you put it down in writing like that, and you really look at all the timelines, I started seeing how even tragedies were repeating in my life, right? That I loved just dying very, you know, tragically. I mean, he was 33 years old when he died. I was 30 years old when he got diagnosed. Very tragic, right? But and I'm not saying, and I want to, like underline this, I'm not saying that I killed him or that I, manifested that, because it can be where some people can go like, oh, I didn't, like for a minute when I was learning about all this stuff, how we create a reality, I went there and I was like, no. That's not what that means. What that means is that you attract in your life what you need to experience over and over and over again until you evolve and grow, right? And let me tell you, I wasn't able to even say these words for a very long time. I mean, it's been almost 15 years now, and obviously I've processed and grieved, and I'm in a very different place. But that was also something that, in a sense, I felt really wronged by, right? I am really meeting someone that is this amazing human being who's literally the light of my life and like loves me so unconditionally. And then why is he being taken away from me again, right? So really seeing life as happening, to me, and feeling powerless, feeling like I'm a victim in it, right? So, and I think I was saying this to you when you said, let's hit record, right?
Yeah.
Saying sometimes, like as coaches, some coaches will say like, and I've been guilty of this too. It's always a choice. It's a decision away, right? It's a choice, to change and to, I would be very careful to say that, because as I was saying, I heard actually this psychotherapist talking about this on a podcast. He made this point brilliantly in a way that I could have never made it. And he was saying, that choice is not there for someone who is born into it, right? If you're born into dysfunction, into abuse, into, unhealthy patterns like that, you never had a choice to know anything different, right? And when we're talking about deep trauma, if you're familiar with trauma at all, you also understand that trauma is not something that you alone can just decide to come out of.
Yeah.
It needs specific treatment. It has a hold on you, right? It runs you. It does control you. So I wanted to, point that out. Now I don't remember why I went there, but
No, we were talking about one point we were talking about was about what helped you see.
right.
The different moments or tools or however you want to call them. But I think the very powerful point that you also made is something around when we are not ready to see something, then there's no choice for us in a sense. When we are stuck in that environment, there's sorry.
Pattern.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a very, very powerful point, because that leads us to, okay, it is very important that we have an environment that can either, create moments where we are pulled out,
right,
or create moments where we can see, where we can reflect, where we can, breathe and take a step back. But when you are stuck in a certain environment, that's not even possible.
That's not even possible, because that the environment is constantly reminding you of who you are, right? You're enmeshed in your environment, especially when it's your family environment. Your identity has formed around that environment, right? So, talking about how do we create change, lasting change, and why are so many people so stuck? Why was that most of my life? Because of that, right? We're so enmeshed with our environment. And even if you make this effort to change, right, when you're back into your environment reminds you of who you are in that environment, right? So it's kind of working against you. Now you're like having to put a lot more effort into that, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's why I say he was meeting him was the only reason why I ever was able to change in my life. I had an opportunity to see something completely different that my environment had never showed me directly. I had observed it in my outer environment with this really good friend of mine, my childhood best friend. She lived above. So we grew up in the same house. So I observed her family dynamic, and I think even that was, really important for me to be able to make that comparison. And going back to like how oftentimes as children we do not have that choice is because that comparison piece is missing for us. We don't know any different. All we know is the reality that we're in that moment, right? So we get older and we see something different, and that plants a seed, right?
Yeah.
The seed of doubt, of curiosity, of questioning what you think for. This is how things are, right? Because it is that lack of awareness that leads us to just sit in where we are, even when it feels terrible and uncomfortable, is what we don't see that's keeping us there, right? So being able to have and I think, also going to what's happening right now, I truly believe that we're in the middle of a paradigm shift. And part of that, in my opinion, is possible because of technology, because we're so much more connected, because we can see different points of view, because we have that comparison, because we're able to say, oh, not everyone celebrates Easter, right? Which I was surprised by when I moved to the US. I was all dressed up, making a big deal out of Easter. No one cared. No one cared. And I was shocked. You don't celebrate Easter? No, we do Easter eggs. Easter eggs. And that's like egg hunts, like, right? But until then, and I'm someone who grew up in Iran, who was born in Iran. And like, so it's not like I hadn't seen the world, but I was like, oh, so it's only when you're pulled out of your environment, exposed to something different, that you start seeing things differently, right? And for me, I would say that having had, meeting this person, it is the moment that really truly changed my life. Now, I went on for years after that because I think his death then re-triggered trauma that I was processed around my dad's death. And I went into a spiral of, this self-destructive spiral of depression. But even then, I would say there was a moment where things started, like, I started doing things differently, right? I started going to therapy. I was doing a lot of group bereavement groups, right? So group therapy. And I ended up doing EMDR I had severe PTSD around just the specifics of his death, right? And it was paralyzing. Like, when I say I'm trauma informed, is because I actually experienced it on my skin, right? And and that was actually very, very powerful. And back then wasn't very well known, but that was the thing that got me unlocked from that PTSD that I kept reliving.
Yeah. And one question on that, like, what do you think sparked that thought in you, or that pull or push, however you want to call it, like, okay, I have to do something about this and I can't go back into this cycle? Maybe it was subconsciously.
I could not function. Like, I would see someone with blue eyes on the subway and be paralyzed in tears, and people would help me off the train, and I literally could not function. But I think also what got me open to trying something different was how powerful these groups were, and the support system that I had at that time, because he had died of cancer. There were a lot of services available to me. And that was when I truly was exposed to therapy in a very healthy and helpful way. Like, it literally saved my life to have those people. And that, again, speaks to the power of community. Those people that were going through the same exact thing that I was going. And I remember, actually, the first time I walked into this room, and everyone there is double my age. because it was a group for people who had lost their spouses.
Mm.
I'm 30 years old, and everyone there is double my age. And I think everyone, and they said that, they thought I was in the wrong room.
Mm.
I think what ended up being very powerful for all of us was to realize that in spite of the difference in age between us, in spite of the amount of time that we had spent with our spouses, we shared so much in common, right? And there was another side to the coin, right? Because for someone who had lost a spouse of 40 years, they were really grieving how that was like such a big chunk of their lives. And then here I'm sitting here and I'm like, I feel like I was robbed of all that. I didn't have an opportunity to have that. I couldn't have children with this person. So really for them to now see their own pain in a different way, right? And it's the same thing for me, right? To be like, oh, well, I'm not in my mid 60s, and I'm 30 years old. It is difficult as this feels right now. I have time to rebuild my life, right? So we're going back to this, seems to be a theme, right? This being able to compare, being able to see a different perspective, that really helped us all kind of, hold each other up and, just navigate this very, very difficult moment that we're going through. Grieving is not something that you can rush. It's not something that you can predict. It's just, and it's different for everyone. And I really felt like, even at that point in my life, a lot of people dropped out of my life. Because I feel like, especially that young, that was a very difficult thing for everyone around me to navigate and help me with. And when people feel helpless or they can't help you, then they feel bad and they just, step back.
Yeah.
And for me, it actually felt good that so many people, I probably pushed them away too, because I couldn't give them what they wanted from me. I could not be smiling or moving on. And people will tell you the weirdest things. Let me tell you. Things,
in the spirit of being supportive or doing
start
something.
Dating, you're beautiful. I'm like, it's been 2 weeks. Like, that is inappropriate. That's really hurting my feelings. I know you mean the best, but like, hey, we have good news at my husband's funeral. We are pregnant. And I'm like, I'm so happy for you. You realize my husband's funeral, like, could have picked a different time, right? So, but yeah, it's been, and that, I think that's part of life, right? As we evolve and grow and experience different things, our life changes and our environment changes, and those that are around us change, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm still thinking about this, that when we can see something else and when we can be fed with other perspectives and thoughts and ideas, it can turn into such a beautiful thing, because we are able to open up, to open doors that before we didn't even know were there. And that's so incredibly powerful. And you mentioned technology earlier. It even opens more doors.
Right. It allows us to see the world everywhere. That it's like, as a parent, that sometimes, like, from conditioning, is like, no screen time, and screen is bad. Like, I've had
I know that too well.
Yeah, I've had to check it because my mom was super strict with that, right? Never watch TV. Back then was TV, right? And I've had to check in with myself, because my kids constantly amaze me with the knowledge they have, given their ages. I'm like, I didn't even know that. Where did you learn that? Oh, Alexa. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, they use technology in a way that I don't even, right? Like, my son's constantly asking Alexa. It's like a Google search, right? Something comes to his mind. It's like, Alexa, what's the fastest car in the world? Like, he'll ask the questions and he gets the answer, right? Where most often I'll be like, I don't know, like, and then he would drop there, right? So yeah, it's important to be open to change, open to, and that's the very thing that I feel by nature we just resist the most, right? We don't like it when things change on us, right? We don't like there's resistance, right? It's like,
there is.
you're gonna take me out of my comfort zone, and
Ooh.
is it really comfortable though? How comfortable is it? Let's be honest, right?
That's a very good point. I think even those of us who talk about change or think about change as a natural, as the only constant,
Right.
a lot sometimes get thrown off by some things that come our way. And we were like, and it goes down back to that point you made very in the beginning, like our expectations.
Right.
And our attachment to what we expect our life to become or to be, that gets in the way, because and then we know it can change, but it should change this way. But sometimes that's just not how the circumstances are, and how the situation is, or maybe even what we need at that point.
Right. And what we need and what we want is not always a match, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes also we think that we want something.
Mm-hmm.
We decided that 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we truly sit there and check in with that, sometimes it's not even what we want anymore, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just not even that. But yes, what we want and what we need, life will always find a way to give you what you need. And let me tell you, for someone who's going through a very, very rough patch right now in this moment, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And you know what? I have the right not to like it.
Yes, absolutely.
I not to like it. I'm in the mud, like I'm walking through the mud, but I know that on the other side, I can leave the mud behind, right? Getting rid of the last of it. Is it fun? Hell no. It really sucks. It really sucks. It's painful. It's messy. It can create self-doubt. It can make you question everything, right? And at the same time, it's like, good, question everything. It's a good opportunity to just sit down and take that inventory. Every now and then, you got to look at it, right? And also be okay with, you know what? Yes, I am a coach. Yes, I've gone through a lot of stuff and I've overcome a lot of it. And yes, I have difficult moments. There's absolutely no shame around that. It's part of life. And if I never had difficult moments, I would stop growing, which is not what I want, right? Am I enjoying this? Not at all. Zero. I'm not enjoying it, right? I'm actually getting a little impatient. Like, okay, I've done a lot of emotional release. Can we just move on, please? But it is what it is, right? There's a lot of acceptance there, and I think there's been growth on my end in even being able to say, you know what, I'm not gonna feel like an imposter or that I'm not as good a coach because I'm having a tough time. What kind of model would I be for my clients if I did that, right? Not who that doesn't define us. It's just a moment. It's just what we're going through in that moment, And yes, it's, it can be a little painful, right? But how fortunate that I have the tools and I know how to navigate it, right? And because that can be a place, we're talking about how people get stuck. That can be people can really get stuck, right? So if you don't have the tools, you don't have the right environment, if you don't have, it's really that, all of that is your support system, right? So if you don't have the right support system, guess what? What we do is we go back to the coping that we have developed as 3, 4, 5-year-olds, because that's all we know, right? People don't go to self-destructive behaviors because they want to be self-destructive. We do because that's all we know. Because a 5-year-old came up with that. And we never learned how to do it different. We never had the guidance. We never, we were never given the tools or exposed to the tools or even knew that the tools were there, right? So I do remind that to myself, like, you know what, yeah, this is super messy, and like I didn't think I was gonna feel this way. But how fortunate am I that I have an amazing support system of coaches that are just incredible human beings, heart-centered, always there when you ask for help. And then I have myself. I mean, Sabrina, you're a coach, and right, that's a lot of what we do is teach people to really see the value in themselves and love yourself and give yourself credit and acknowledge yourself, right? So I'm walking my talk.
Awesome. So good to hear that, because as I was listening to you, I was just thinking, okay, yeah, if you are stuck in a situation that is toxic, if you're in a lot of pain, then try and change your environment. Try and evaluate, are the people that I'm right now surrounded with are actually a good support system, or what's going on here, or what are my expectations even? You said a lot of interesting things that people can use as tools to sort of evaluate the situation and then say, okay, this is what I can do.
Right.
Remembering that it's temporary, everything is.
Right.
The only constant is change.
Right. We talked about this on Recognize podcast. Yeah.
Yes.
The only constant is change. And yet we tend to see life as something that we want to just control by keeping it the same, And sometimes the change is not something you can see, very clearly, and sometimes in the face. That's where I'm at. Talking about walls that you hit, or like, coming to terms with certain things when, there's an ending, right? Just for reference, my divorce just ended so that people know what we're talking about. And while that there is a lot to celebrate, and I am happy, that's what I wanted, there's also a lot to sit with, right? Ponder.
Absolutely.
And, again, take inventory and look at, what did I learn? And, just sit with it for a minute, right? Which I think that when you're in the middle of things, you just push forward, right? You push forward. Yes, of course, it went on for a long time. So I processed a lot of it, but I'm processing a lot more. I'm like, oh, there's more. Look at that.
And that's the interesting thing again, right? Like when we get, when we're in the middle of it, as you say, we can't even sometimes see what is going on. We are just functioning, and probably we are following certain patterns that, again, we formed over time. Right. But once we are through it with the whole thing, that's when we can take time consciously to say, like, hey, let me sit with it and let me actually process this. I've seen a lot of people just moving on, like, now this is done, now I can move on. But it doesn't work like that. It really...
Well, it works in the moment, and then what it does is recreates the same life with a different person, a different, situation. You're recreating a different version of the same.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
To me, and that is, I would say I've observed. Somehow I feel like the pandemic got a lot of divorces started, but I've observed that like most people just move on. Into a new relationship, move on, like they just turn the page, right? I don't believe that. I don't believe that is beneficial, because one of the things, and the reason why I'm here is because yes, right, I've been through that, right? Yeah. 2 years into my husband dying is when I met my second husband, right? The one that I just got divorced from. I was not ready. Yes, it was 2 years, but in that case, it wasn't just a breakup. It was someone deeply loved, right? And there was grieving involved, right, around his death. I was not ready. And guess what? What was reflected back in my life was my trauma, was, and he's someone who has gone through loss himself. And, that's exactly what was a match for me in that moment, right? And, like we could get a lot deeper into that and say that, like all relationships may eventually change and morph and not fit us, anymore, right? Especially if you're someone that is constantly growing and evolving, right? Maybe the other person's not necessarily, even open to that or growing at the same pace, right? So I've come to really accept that, again, nothing is permanent, right? Nothing's gonna be there forever. And it really always constantly points me back to sitting with the present moment and creating what I have. Like, I have it right now I do that a lot with my kids, because I also see my kids as like, this kid I have today is not going to be the kid I have tomorrow.
No,
right?
they change so quickly.
So quickly. I mean, like, my son is like 10, and I'm like, he's almost as tall as me. I'm like, I can't hold him anymore. It's like, I go kiss him, and he's like, Mom, not here, not now. What? Right? So I do that. They're like my biggest teachers. Like, they are that always bring me back to love, always bring me back to the present, because they're constantly putting that in your face, right? Even when we're like busy being the best mom, getting all a gazillion things done, busy, they always bring you back to, they can be so present. And that kind of goes away as they get a little bit older, but and you're like, oh yeah, fine, and you're just so unconscious like me. I'm joking, but like, they do change. I mean, I see a difference between my 10-year-old and she's almost 8, but I do see a difference, right? She's a lot more in her world, which can be frustrating when you have to catch the bus in the morning, But yeah, that's the only thing that you can ever know for sure, is what you have right now in this moment, right? And I think the concept that love lasts forever, the relationships last forever, and I could be completely wrong, right? Don't take my word for it. That's where I'm at in my life, right?
That is the lesson you sort of
got
for you. Yeah.
Change. It can change because people do change. That doesn't person doesn't make what you have any less valuable, and I strongly believe that if the love is there, and you also navigate the change together, right? So that's where I'm at.
That's your deep insights. There's one last question that I have that is about the recurring pattern of trauma, that shows up when something similar, or sometimes even something very different happens, but somehow it triggers that whole sense of trauma again. So if there was someone who listens to our conversation or watches it, who's like, yeah, that's where I'm at, what is your best advice for them?
Well, first of all, I would say, there's different levels of trauma, right? So I want to just make this very general point about what I see in people, when people are stuck. We're talking about, oftentimes people are stuck. They just cannot bring on that change. Well, there's some level of trauma there, minor, major, there's different types of. Oftentimes when I work with clients, I do go very deep, because if someone's not moving, someone really wants something and they're not moving, they fall back into their patterns, right? There's something else underneath there, right? And oftentimes as you start digging deeper and deeper and tracing it back, it always goes back to something from childhood, and oftentimes even something very silly. Once you see from the eyes of the adult, of the you today, right? But going back to your question, if it is a true, traumatic event that has happened, obviously you're not going to be able to do anything about it if you don't know that it's that has happened, right? So there's a phase where you diagnose that, right? Even as a coach, where you're try to get to the bottom, right? Which is why I don't believe in coaching that's surface coaching. I believe into going into the emotions, into the behavior, into the mindset. It's not just mindset. It's not just the emotional. It's all of it, right? It's a mindset, the behavior, the emotional, the spiritual. It's much more holistic. To me, true transformation is a holistic transformation, right? So it's about really starting to look at all the different parts of your life, really diagnosing what's working, what's not working, right? Why am I able to show up powerfully here, but I can't show up powerfully there, right? But if it's something that you have tried to change again and again and again, and you can't do it on your own, I wish that I could tell everyone, you know what, you can do it on your own. You know what? Yes, you can do it on your own. You're going to hit enough walls for, over and over and over again. It can take many years. Then you'll hit the one wall that will allow you to see what it is that's keeping you stuck. Or if you're super stuck and you cannot bring change, ask for help. Allow someone to help you see what you cannot see. And that's what we do as coaches. That's why I believe is the most beautiful job I can dream of, because we have the ability. We don't really give answers. We don't really solve people's problems. You solve your own problem. But I'm here because I'm here to show you something I can see from my viewpoint. That you are it's your blind spot, right? And we have it too. We have it too.
Everyone has it, yeah.
Exactly. And so if this everything that you've tried until now is not working, right? Guess what? To keep trying the same thing in the same way on your own may keep you there, right? Until that event happens, until the universe brings you the experience that's going to turn that around. And you know what? In my experience, it's oftentimes not fun, right? It's oftentimes in the form of something tragic, your marriage not working out, someone dying, in your job. It's not always so extreme, right? So it can come in that form. Or today, you have an opportunity to even listen to this, right? You can just really sit down and maybe try something different. Maybe try to ask for help. Maybe invest in yourself. Invest in yourself. Allow someone that can help you to help you. See where it goes. You have nothing to lose. You know what? You can sit where you're at, keep doing what you've done until today, and it may or may not work in a few years from now, or in a month from now, something significant happens that helps you see things differently, or you can just try something different, right? And I learned that. And ever since I navigate my life like that, I have really evolved as a human being at a pace that it took many tragedies before for me to get here, right?
Yeah.
And, I know we hear oftentimes, I'm here to tell you this so that you don't have to suffer like I did, right? And I am here to tell you this so that you don't have to take as long as I did. But I believe that sometimes, yes, it is the going through those hardships that's going to make you be open to other avenues, right? Trying something different. But, I would say that if you're stuck, it's definitely a pattern that's repeating. It's an unconscious pattern that you're repeating. The answer is never out there. I know it's so much easier to say, so my mom did this and my dad did that and my life was like this. You know what? You can't control what they do, right? All of that may even be true, but the only way to take the reins is to take the reins and look within, right? Turn it around. What can I do differently? What is it that I learned from this? What could I have done differently, right? I mean, I learned about myself just in the last few weeks that I learned in my life to not ask for help. Because ask for help, it wasn't given. It was denied, right? And I caught myself in that pattern very recently. I'm like, oh my, I can't believe I'm doing this. It is a pattern for me that I try to do it all by myself. I try to survive this on my own, right? And sometimes it's hard to admit that, right? But it's like, oh yeah, that was a blind spot for me. Look at that.
There it comes, the blind spot.
The blind spot. Right? We have it too. So, and that is my recommendation, right? Especially if it's something like very self-destructive or toxic that you know it's really not good for you and you can turn it around. I mean, I have not met someone that when I dug deeper, it wasn't some form of emotional trauma or, like the deep down, oftentimes it is in the very early, years of our lives. Sometimes it's a little more recent, but even with that, when you track it back, it's like, oh no, but hold on, this more recent experience really is there because there was that earlier belief.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? So it's not something you can really do on your own. It's not something you can do by watching Tony Robbins or, like Jay Shetty, or you can get curious, right? You can get curious and have the awareness that, wait, something's not adding up. Something is not adding up because I cannot bring on this change, right? And what we naturally do, we go into beating ourselves up, right? Oh, see, I'm just lazy, or I'm not really putting in the effort. I will never change, right? Really, that is the thing that's keeping you there, telling yourself all those things, right? But it does take someone to be like, hey, you said you wanted to change, and look at how, and you said that you don't like the way, your mom or your husband talks to you. You're talking to yourself way worse than they are, right? So, but because a lot of these habitual behaviors are habitual, they slip our awareness, right? We just do it and don't realize that we're doing it, right? So how are you going to see that? You're going to see that when there's the contrast, when there's someone that's like, oh, let me
Mirroring that back. That is so true. So it's really taking that time to evaluate,
right.
again, see, okay, this is not good. I'm stuck. Acknowledge it, because many people, or even, I have found myself in that space where I was not ready to even acknowledge that I was stuck.
Right.
It can be very scary. So be brave enough to acknowledge it. And from there, you can ask for help if you're really stuck.
Good point. That's a good point. Have the courage to change. It takes courage to change.
Yes.
And oftentimes big motivation. And that big motivation, maybe you invest in yourself and you find that motivation in a healthy way, or the motivation is going to come from wanting to escape the pain you're in, right? Wanting to change that pain, not wanting to suffer.
Yeah.
But yes, it takes courage to change. It really does. And also I would say, have compassion for yourself. Be okay with humanness. Be okay with not being perfect. Try.
Yeah.
I actually challenge my clients. I'm like, hey, just give you like your action steps, your homework. I want you to just embrace your imperfections today for a while. Do it all week. Find something. What can you learn from them? Find humor in them. Find a to be amused by them, to make fun of yourself. Just switch that voice for like a day or an hour with one thing that you do. Start there, instead of the nasty, overly critical, self-beating voice that we all were trained to have, that hopefully this new generation won't have. Because I do believe we're in the middle of a paradigm shift. We're realizing a lot of things about ourselves collectively.
I also feel that there's several people have called it the conscious revolution going on.
Right.
And I also feel, especially because we are so connected and there's so much out there these days about, growth and healthy living and spirituality and all those topics related to it, and trauma, how to deal with it. So there is definitely a big shift happening. I feel the same way.
Right. Our kids are not going to be thinking the way we do.
No.
Thank God. Because it was not very healthy. And there's why so many people can resonate right? With all the messages that are out there about this stuff. It's like from the most toxic families to the ones that were the toxicity was a little bit more, underground and like more accepted within the conditioning or the social tradition, even, right? Those are the sneakiest ones, right? Because that's just ingrained in tradition, right?
Yeah.
So like there is a layer of that collectively, generationally, right? And it is diluting. Also what happens in history matters, right? My mom was born 45 at the end of World War II. My grandparents lived it during a war. That also matters, right? And I do think that our children will be completely different human beings than we are.
And that is such a beautiful thought. And with that, we shall end this wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to share, especially, this very intense part of your story.
Right. Which one?
So many parts.
Of it.
the whole thing of it.
But the beautiful thing is that it doesn't have to be that way anymore, right? So that's really my message. Like, your life could have been super intense up until today, and yes, you can change that. You absolutely can.
So that was my deep dive with Fatí Light. I hope you took a lot out of it. Let us know your own insights, your own thoughts, your own experiences. Share. Like, subscribe, comment, show us the love, and we are showing you lots of love. Let me give you a hug, and I see you for episode 3 next week, Tuesday, where I am talking with Rick about the inside-out perspective. Speak soon.